Welcome to Business Uncomplicated, the podcast where we cut through the noise, simplify the complex, and help smart leaders navigate the world of change. Today, we're tackling something most people think is dead, but I think our guest is going to prove them very wrong. The guest we have today married into one of the best last names in the business. It's Mastery. And after 30 years in sales, she's earned it. Beth Mastery is founder of Beth Mastery Enterprises and the creator of Inbox Revenue Generator, and the person sales teams call when their prospecting emails go straight into the trash. When we talk about, here's a stat that might make you cringe. Salespeople spend roughly 21% of their days, that's 48 days a year, writing and crafting emails that often get ignored, deleted, or worse, build walls between you and your prospect. Beth has been on both sides. She's seen what works, what doesn't, and why most sales teams are making it way harder than it needs to be. Her philosophy is simple: stop pitching and start teaching. Create FOMO, fear of missing out, not pressure. Make relationship deposits before you even ask for the first meeting. She's trained teams at companies of all sizes, and every time they're shocked at how simple selling can be when you stop convincing and start connecting. Today, we're talking email, AI, authenticity, and why the subject line requesting discounts might be the best one she's ever written. So let's welcome Beth Mastery to the show and try to master what she knows.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome, Beth, to Business Uncomplicated. How you doing today?
Thanks. I'm great. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, well, we're glad to have you. The topic we're going to embark on is, I think, an interesting one, partly because I would say that most people think email marketing and email communication is dead, that it doesn't even exist anymore. And it's funny when I've came across your LinkedIn and we have been following you, and it's funny because we just kind of followed each other and kind of created this relationship. I've been learning so much more about what I should be doing as a business owner in my email marketing, which is scary to say. So thank you for that. Thank you for pulling out my faults and insecurities about outreach and email. But I think it's still really relevant based on what you've been talking about, and I want people to hear about that. But before we jump into that, introduce yourself, tell the listeners who you are, give us a little bit about your background and how you became who you are today.
Yeah, so I married into a great last name. It's Mastery, so I'm Beth Mastery. It's not quite exactly spelled like Mastery, but that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
And I've been in sales for 30 plus years. I've kind of seen it all. And I say this often. I wish I had appreciated just how easy sales was back in the day, 30 years ago, because it was really easy, but you still sweated it out, right? The
Right.
reality of it is you had to really learn and adapt. And I think what I see today a lot is that teams and reps don't adapt. They go, gosh, this is what made me successful. I'm going to do it this way. And they don't recognize they're building barriers. And I'm all about lowering the barrier. And I wish I could tell you, like, I've had this easy, glorious, magical past. I really haven't. There was a period in my life that I was confident. Listen, part of it was ego. I was young and I was making a lot of money. And then it was kind of a toxic environment. So I thought I would switch. And then what I found out very quickly was my ego sort of got the best of me. And I think I heard what I wanted to hear and not what the reality of that situation was. And so it took me a long time to realize, no, I don't have to believe these thoughts. These thoughts are not who I am. And so then it got me out of the hole.
And so you've been in sales for a long time. So you've seen the evolution of sales, right? We talk a lot on this podcast about software and software transformations and the evolution of software. But I mean, sales is really the backbone of any organization. I mean, when I worked at Salesforce, I mean, sales was the department, right? It led the roost because you guys are bringing in all the money. And so having an effective sales organization is critical to any organization. So over the years, how have you seen selling change from when you first started and the tactics you would use when you first started, and maybe embarrassingly so, like, I can't believe I did that, to like now we're, eventually get into the topic of AI?
Yeah. So, back in the day, it was really easy. And you could literally say, I'm coming on site and I need these 7 people in the room, and they'd all be there. That is just not going to happen today. And people are really hesitant today to make decisions. They want the
Right.
outcome, but they have been burned. And the thing I see, and that you kind of are talking a little bit about, people sometimes try things and then they get burned. And then they're not willing to take the next step to try something different. And what I see a lot of is that they put things in the wrong order. So they will buy all kinds of things to supposedly help their sales team. But if they don't know how to have the conversation, what to say in an email, they're not going to go anywhere today. We are in a world that's very constricted. And 2008, I think, really started changing the environment where teams got skinny. You used to have 3 people doing 3 jobs. Now you've got 1 person doing 3 jobs, and they just don't know what they don't know. So as a sales rep, you're invaluable. But the problem I see is everybody leads with, here's who we are. Here's where we're great. Let me help you. Here's the problem we can solve. We can save you time and money. Look at our great success stories. And it just blows up in their face.
Yeah, it's interesting because we talk about a lot in our selling process, like, oh, we need those stories. We need those stories.
Uh-huh.
But really, what we're trying to get to is that problem, identifying that, not so much the solution yet, but kind of that emotional connection.
Yeah.
How can I empathize with the fact that I understand you're having a challenge and this is the challenge? And I think so much of it is hard because people are obsessing over the right words at the right time, at the
Yep.
right place. And so to your point, in before 2008, you could sit in a room and kind of have more of that organic conversation, right? And play off people. Now we have to play off a computer, right? It's this faceless outreach in most cases, and we all get it, right? Those tons of LinkedIn messages. Hey, I can do this for your company and I can do that for your company. And you're like, can you though? To your point, people are like, yeah, I've heard this spiel 1,000 times over. Kind of so as you move past 2008, it became more digital. Like
Right.
how did the selling experience change, or how did the outreach change for you, and eventually kind of lead you to running the company you do today?
Yeah. So I think the thing that really changed is, and I have this saying, people are happy to be unhappy. Like they have containment around their unhappiness. So they'll stick with whatever's not working. And this is where I think people are struggling to sort of make the transition. We used to go in and ask that horrible question, but it worked great at the time, like, what's keeping you up at night? And at
Right.
this point, you better know what's keeping them up. But here's the tricky part. If we go in, and I'm going to call it pre-selling, and we explain to someone about this problem, they might have that problem, but they're not going to do one thing about it. And I'll give you a real
Right.
world example. So I was reaching out to a contact, very big company, multi-billion-dollar company. And I could see that he was forwarding my emails 487 times. And this happened week after week after week. And I was going crazy. Like, why will this guy not get back with me? On the 13th attempt, he got back to me. He said, Beth, I've listened to every voicemail. I've read every email. I've used most of your free assets. He goes, all those things, we hate them. They're horrible. They're painful. We're not doing one thing about them. He goes, but today you found my initiative stack. I was like, okay. So the whole time I was getting mind share, right? But
Right.
he was not willing to have a conversation with me because he knew this was not something that was going to, get funding for.
Right. Right. And it's so interesting because I think that the funding question is always I mean, for us who've been inside companies, we've been through the budgeting process, and most companies started in July, right? Now they should be towards
Yeah.
the end if they have a January start and they got all their initiatives. And when I was at Dell, it would start with, you've got $50 million to spend. By the time the budget was finalized, I've got like 20 million, but they still want me to execute against the $50 million, but asks of things. So how do you get around that? So from a selling perspective, how do you get around, what's the initiative? What is that? Because I will say personally, that's the thing I think about all the time.
Yeah.
Does my website say the
Right.
right thing? Am I saying the right thing? Do I sound like everybody else? when you're trying to figure out how do you sound unique?
Well, part of it is you cannot pitch, so you have to teach. You have to say, like, are there questions that they're not, you know how you've been in a conversation and you go, oh my gosh, they're not even asking the right questions. Well,
Right.
that's a teaching moment, right? Or what mistakes are organizations making, or what things are they overlooking, or what's changing in their environment? Like, what is it that I can teach them? And I'll give you a great example of this. Needed a air conditioner in the heart of July. So what do? I called my friends and they got the recommendation. I called 5 different people. Crazy, I know. First 4 guys came, looked at my unit, handed me a piece of paper and said, just tell us when you want it installed. I'm sure they thought they had me because it was July and it
Right.
was miserably hot. The last guy came, and I'm telling you this story because you and your listeners will be like, okay, now let me rethink about how I sell this. This guy goes, can I come in? Can I walk every room in your house? Can we talk about airflow and stuff in there? So we went every single room. And he'd always look up and look at my vents, hot or cold, what time of year. Looked at my mechanical room, long time in there. Then he went outside and looked at my unit, came back in, sat down with me. And the very first thing he said to me, he goes, I will not be the cheapest, but I will solve your problems. And I'm like, okay.
Hmm.
And he told me a few things. He said, I know you built this house. He said, your mechanical room, all wrong. He goes, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to take it all out. I'm going to start over. He said, the unit outside, way too small for the size of your house, which was interesting because when I went back and looked, the guys that had come out previously were going to give me exactly what I had. So, and then he said, when I make these changes, he goes, you'll save about $150 a month in your heating and cooling. And I did. I mean, clearly I hired
Wow.
him, but he taught me. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
Buyers don't know what they don't know, but as a rep, you sure do, or your company sure does, but it's not
Right.
your offering. Never talk about my company, never talk about my name, never talk about any of that. I simply teach them. And then I think to get to your question even deeper, they just start wanting to have a conversation. This should be
Right.
organic and authentic. This should not be me pitching, convincing, pushing, prodding. This should be them saying, huh, that's interesting. What else do you
Right.
know? What other things would you want to talk about?
Right. Right. I think that's an interesting take because I feel like there's so many conversations that go on now, right? Podcasts, they're all over the
Mhm.
place, right? Social media clips, YouTube. Like I feel like if you need to solve a problem, so I will say in the example of hiring somebody, you call 20 people, oh, I can get out there 3 weeks from Thursday. Then eventually you go to YouTube and you're like, oh, all I have to do is do this and this. And I have rewired so many things in my life. Never would be an electrician in my life, but I figured out how to change a fuse, how to change this, because part of it is necessity. So when you think about all those things that are out there and you think about teaching people, how do you deal with context? Because I feel like a lot of
Yeah.
times the context of what you need to talk to people about is really critical. And so kind of catching that teaching moment with the context.
Yeah. I think a lot of times too, you don't know what you don't know because they're in their walls, right? And you're in your
Right.
walls. And this is where the relationship deposits. And I was just telling a team this morning, like, you don't know what's going on at work. You don't know if they're overworked. You don't know if they're in a toxic work environment. You don't know if they have a family issue. You don't know if they have a health crisis. Like, you don't know. So this is where I think teams go wrong. And I'll use this as an analogy. Let's say that your quote is $1 million. You've got 10 deals in the pipeline. They're each worth $100,000. Here's the problem. Your closing rate, 30%. Whoa, you're not going to get anywhere near 1 million. So now you need 3x your pipeline. This is
Right.
where sales reps go a little crazy because they think like, okay, I got to close all these deals instead of building a pipeline that's very healthy. So I'll give you an example. I might call you and say, hey, Rich, you know what? There are 4 questions that companies are failing to ask, and it's causing them such heartburn because they don't get the outcome they need. They're not asking them because they're not obvious. I'd like to share
Right.
with you what these 4 questions are so you and your team can prepare for whatever the initiative is, right? And I just ask them for 20 minutes. So it's
Right.
more about FOMO. I say it all the time. You have to create FOMO. What are they? Fear
Right.
of missing out. What do I
Right.
not know? And I'm not
Well, what's
asking for anything.
interesting is to your point is people don't really take that empathetic look at sales sometimes. They don't think about the person on the other end of the phone is, I've got 80,000 emails, 70,000 Slacks. Like, my kid's got to get to the doctor's appointment. I've got to deliver on this roadmap. Like, I don't have time to listen to an endless pitch about how wonderful you are. Like, that doesn't solve my problem. And so it's funny you say that, because as a consultant, I normally have come in post sales, right? Not usually part of the sales process. And so, our goal is to build that relationship, and hopefully they'll buy more services and so on and so forth. But it's funny, in a lot of times, my role within my company now is I'm more of an advisor with people. And so I'll be working with other vendors and companies, and I'll say, hey guys, if you're going to go and talk to the CIO, this is how they like things. And this is what I'd stay away from. This is what I would go towards. And I can't tell you how many people are like, oh yeah, thanks for the information, and walk in with their agenda anyways and flub it.
Yep.
And I had this conversation with this sales rep the other day where we were in the middle of an implementation, and the implementation was going sideways. And I was talking to the sales rep about it, and he goes, you know what? I'm going to trust you. And I said, over your team? I said, that's bold. Why? And he said, during the sales process, you told me exactly what to say, exactly what to avoid. And I trusted you for some strange reason, although I had no reason to. I didn't know you. And I landed the deal. And I just go back to that because I'm like, there are certain instances in our careers or whatever where having that person tell you, guys, like, cut through the bullshit. This is the 3 things they care about. And to your point, I was able to guide them because I was inside that wall, right? And so I was seeing firsthand what was going on at that company. And I was able to interpret to the sales rep, like, here's the pitfall. Here's the right thing to go talk about. They don't care about this. They care about this. And he did it and landed the deal. So if you are kind of coaching people around that and they can't see beyond that wall, what is kind of the guidance around that empathy layer, or that kind of stepping out of yourself? You are not important in this grand scheme of things. How do you coach people, and do they listen? I guess it's really
Well, that's a really good question. It's a really good question, because I think at some point the pain of struggle becomes enough where they ultimately go, okay, I'm ready to try something different. And I blame onboarding. I'll be honest, this is an onboarding problem. What happens when there's so many things that happen in onboarding, right? There's
Right.
systems and procedures and policies. And oh, by the way, there's also usually some sales training, but they say, here's who we are. We've been in business this long. We solve these kind of problems. We're better than our competitors because of this, right? We have all these great case studies. And what the prospect goes is, whatever, we're different. And
Right.
not us. And not generally true, but that is their perception. So you have to be able to say, you know what, there are 3 things changing in the environment. We actually think 1 or 2 of these might hit you. I just want to be sure you're aware of them so that you can take it back to your team and figure out a plan around it. When do you have 20 minutes that I can chat with you about that? Right?
Yeah, I like that.
What do I got going on?
Right. So it's more of the idea of, listen, if you look across your industry, let's take AI. Everyone's moving to AI. You know you're going to do it. And typically people have these 3 problems. We think these are going to hit you. I actually think that's brilliant because it's super simple, right? It's telling you exactly what you know to be true anyways.
Right.
And it's somebody telling me, yeah, you're right. I probably am going to hit that problem. And I really kind of, I always say you intellectually think about it, but you haven't internalized it yet.
Well, you bring up a really great point, because you're going to get one of 3 answers. You're going to get, we didn't know, so we don't have a plan, which is easy, right? We do know, but we don't have a plan because we don't really know what to do about it, right? And then on a very rare occasion, you're going to get someone who goes, yeah, we already know it. We already got a plan around it. And then my response back to them would be very authentic, because it doesn't happen. I'll be like, that's incredible. I never hear that. Now you really have me curious. What else are you working on? Because my guess is you're way ahead of everybody else.
Right.
And then they cannot wait to tell you. Yeah,
that's interesting, because I was just thinking about, and I wrote a blog post this morning about 2026 and planning. And at this point, everybody should pretty much be done and locked. My kind of point of the article was, but have you really thought about the execution? Because 90% of your team is mixed up in the day-to-day. They are worried about closing out the year. They're worried about starting the new year. Everybody's going to be focused on CKO and SKO and all those great things that happen in January and February. And then March comes along and everyone's like, well, how come we haven't made any progress on our roadmap? Yeah, that's because you've been spending the last 2 months worried about closing last year and starting this year, and
Right.
nobody had a plan. And so then everybody scrambles. And so I always think of the roadmap as the lofty goal you want to accomplish that
Mhm.
usually has 20 things that if you get 2 done, great. And that's why I always say when we build roadmaps, why do we have all these things? Because you have all these vendors calling and you get distracted with the shiny objects
Mhm.
and so wants this and so wants that. And then, oh, well, now AI. So now we got to shift everything to AI. And you're like, okay, great. But really, what are we trying to accomplish? What is our goal? What is our outcome? And so I find it interesting in the sales process that in most cases, internally, people are confused about that.
Uh-huh.
And so by just adding more kind of product information or use case information, you're like, that's great. I don't know how that applies to me. I don't know how that helps me.
Right.
Mm, I work
And it's a self agenda, right? It's the seller's agenda.
well, and that's what that's what I think is interesting is, I worked at Salesforce for years, and Salesforce is a great marketing company. I mean, they're probably better known
Mhm.
for a marketing company than anything else. And tons of customer stories, tons of statistics. So, if you buy Marketing Cloud, it's going to save you 72% on email opening. 72% of your emails are going to be open. Da, 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 da. The stats they throw out. And I always found it interesting that the marketing machine was so kind of the thing that drove the engine and this, the animals and the consistency and all the pretty slides, which they were very pretty. But it kind of fell flat because when I was a customer, I'd be like, okay, great, awesome, if you can do it. But how does that 72% apply to me? Like, how am I going to get 72%? Because my environment's different than that, or I'm not as mature, so how do you coach people on those factors? Like, eventually you're going to get to, if you get past the, yes, I do want to talk to you, Beth, you eventually are going to give that story or you're going to give that stat, right? You get to give that competitive information. So how does that then play out?
So I think there's a few things. I always tell people don't say us, me, we, our, or they. Right. The minute you say that, it's about you. And here's the easy swaps. It's so simple. Don't say that. Just say in the industry or other organizations. I don't want to say my competitors. I want to keep it as clean as possible because when you say in the industry, people lean in and they go, wait, what? Like, help me understand. And so there are the internal stories that you can use, but there's so much deeper in that conversation. The whole idea, when I teach people about email, I'm like, email's not for selling. It is not for selling. You cannot sell unless you are transactional. Right. But your email is about getting a meeting. And yes, when you started earlier and you said, like, nobody looks at email anymore. Nobody picks up the phone anymore.
Right.
Everybody still uses email. The reason email doesn't work, and when I have people send me their emails, I'm like, oh my gosh, I already know why they're not responding to you and why you're getting deleted. Like, it starts on that subject line. Like, my best email ever has been one where the subject line was requesting discount. I just try to give them heartburn, and it worked great. Right? Because people would, and I would tell them, then you have to be authentic, right? I'm going to give you some strategies. I don't expect anything in return. When do you have 20 minutes, right? It's just very, very simple, but you're going to get deeper into conversations where now you're going to start to get into the, here's how I can help, or this is what we can do, or this is how we look at it. And then you can use your percentages and stories. The problem is, and I see this in email all the time, people start right here in the very beginning. It's like going on a
Right.
date. It'd be like, Rich, if you and I were dating and I said, hey, we're going to get married on our very first date. We're going to have 2 kids and we're going to vacation on these months. You'd be like, oh my gosh, this lady's crazy.
Right.
Right. And that's what they're doing in email. And that's what they're doing in prospecting is they're just trying to say like, here's why I'm great. And we're in a world where they don't trust and they don't believe. And they're not willing to take a risk.
Right. So to your point, most emails die on inbox, right? They're going to be deleted right away, probably not even opened. If they're open, they'll scan through them and be like, yeah, I don't care, delete it. And you'll continue to follow up. with no response and just keep them in the loop because they're in your database, right? So change that narrative for us. Specifically talk about your business and how you like what your focus is on how you change that narrative with people.
Yeah.
And then we'll
So
talk a little
I'll give
bit
you a really
after about AI tools and stuff like that because I know that's an important
yeah.
part of your business now.
I'm working with this one company, and this gal had said, "I'm sending email after email after email, and I'm not getting any response." And I was like, "I have no idea what you're sending, so send it to me." And so when I saw it, I knew instantly what was wrong. I mean, she was busy saying how many years of experience she has, and these are the things
Right.
she can do for them. And so I created an AI tool that literally you answer like 8 questions, and then you select one of 5 subject lines, and then it spits out an email. But this email has my IP. So basically, it's, here's what I know, here's what I'm going to give you. I don't have any expectation, and then grab 20 minutes with me. And this gal emailed me back and said, it hasn't even been 24 hours, and I already have a meeting with a VP of sales. And I was like, yeah,
Awesome.
because you told her you know something, that she's
Right.
worried that she doesn't, that FOMO, right? And
Right.
so when I'm working with sales teams, it's really about giving them the tools. So I kind of have a couple different business models. One is where they can just, each rep creates their own emails, they're responsible for prospecting. Do you know the scary statistic that they spend 21% of their day writing an email? I was like, I'm so curious. I'm going to
Crazy.
extrapolate that out over a year. That was 48 days just
That's
writing
crazy.
emails. Right.
Yeah,
And
that's
now they
crazy.
can just do it in 5 minutes. Right. So it's super simple and easy and clean, and they can create as many as they need. And then I have other clients where I literally it's a done with you program, not for
Mm,
you, because I
right.
need to they know what they know. I don't know what they
Right.
know. So I need to
Right.
understand what they feel like their strategic edge is, and then I create emails for them that they then push out.
Yeah, and that's interesting because that model in consulting is and we used to talk about this in Salesforce. It's the do it yourself, do it with me, do it for me, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Model, which I think works really well because I think there are people who like, great, I get it. Great, the tool makes sense. I know exactly what I need to say and I can do it. But I think most people struggle with, and or let me ask you the question, do you feel like most people struggle with really understanding their story and the problems they are solving for their client? Because we spend so much time as business owners trying to build the marketing message, tell our
Mhm.
story,
Mhm.
make sure we have the right website, make sure we're using the right words and the images are the right place and the colors aren't, the right place. My son was working on a project for school where they were doing a stock market thing and he had to build a logo. And I said to him, I said, did you do any research about your logo? And he said, no, why? And I said, well, psychologically, there are colors that work
Mhm.
more with logos than better. I said, what color do you often see in logos? And he's like, well, I never really thought about it. I said, okay, so think about McDonald's, think about Home Depot, think about all these big brands, And he's like,
Mhm.
yeah, a lot of them use red, and a lot of them use orange, and a lot of them use. And I said, yeah, these psychologically, these colors are attracting you in, and you don't even know it. He's like, really? And I said, yeah. It's like because these colors are like what's doing it. So it's kind of the same thing in your messaging, right? So we spend so much time obsessing as company owners over this, but we don't really spend enough time obsessing over who our clients are and
Right.
what we need to say to them and how we need to talk to them.
Right.
So
Well, there's
how
where
do
I
you
think the rub is.
yeah. Yeah. So
The rub is right
that would be
there.
the more do it with you model in your
Yeah.
scenario. So
Yeah.
how do you coach people through that? And do people come to you realizing that is potentially the problem? Or is it the aha moment as they're talking to you?
Yeah, I don't know if they know right there that that's the problem. I think everybody looks for the easy button. I'm going to go buy one of these things. I heard you can get them on eBay. Everybody's like, hey, I'm going to go get this for the sales team and they're going to be successful. And I'm like, but if they don't understand how to have a conversation, how to create an email that really allows people to raise their hand and go, hey, yes, I absolutely want to be part of this conversation. That's where they struggle. So for 30 years, we talk about here's who we are and here's what we do and here's why we're
Right.
great and here's how we can help you, right? And so that's what everybody keeps beating the drum for. When you want to separate yourself, you start teaching your clients. And so I think they have the aha moment. Here's the real aha that happens. How difficult is it when you want to go in and try and convince and pitch? Think about when you're pitched. Do you like to be
Yeah.
pitched? Absolutely
No,
not.
I hate it.
You don't want to be pitched at all. When they realize, like, I can make a relationship deposit and I can
Right.
say things that they want to hear and they want to set meetings with me, that's a game changer for them. They have to, and I also tell people quit chasing the wrong metrics. The open rates are, do you know that if you have a Mac or an iPhone, that's an instant open rate? If you have a
Mm,
preview pane, that's an instant open rate, right? I say there's one metric and only one metric you need to follow. And that is, did I get a meeting? Have I increased my number of meetings? That's
right.
it. Because if you get the meeting, you get the opportunity to have a conversation. But if you're just sending email after email after email, and then yes, you will get lucky and you will get a meeting. But most often I find people just, they vomit everything about them. Like, here's how I can help. And the buyer's just building a wall at that time. So instead, if you just had an organic, authentic conversation to say, like, there are two major mistakes most organizations make, and they don't even know they make them. I'd like to share those with you so that you can take it back to your team. Make sure you guys are not on that path.
Right. How much of this is fear? Fear of
What do you mean by
failing,
that?
fear of getting the answer
Oh,
no. Like, I mean, there's a psychological aspect to selling, right? And a lot of us
right.
don't like the
100%.
word no.
Right.
I try to explain that to my kids all the time. You're going to hear no a lot in your life, so get used to it.
Right. Great.
And so how much of that in people's writing is really fear-based because they're afraid if they don't say the corporate structure, oh, here's who we are and here's what we do. And this fear of really being authentic and saying, listen, there might be some warts here and I'm willing to share that with you.
Right. You're 100% on. Most leaders will say, I've got a prospecting problem. And in the back of my head, I'm like, you don't have a prospecting problem. You have a fear problem. Fear of what to say, fear of rejection, fear of not hitting quota, fear of their manager. I mean, like, you could run down that fear path a
Right.
very long time. And so when you make things so much easier for them, and you're going to get to your solution, but if you pitch right out of the gate, they've shut it down and now you're done, unless they're actually looking, and that's really rare today. So the
Right.
fear also runs on the other side. The fear is, I don't believe you. It's sort of like a resume. Like,
Right.
how many resumes have you seen that you're like, whoa, this person walks on water, and then you get them and you're like, what happened? That person doesn't exist, right? And so, because they've been burned and because now we need things by consensus and we have multiple stakeholders,
Mm.
potentially the owner of that problem isn't willing to put their neck on the line to bring everybody else in to that conversation. So you have to create value and you have to make a relationship deposit because they don't believe you.
Yeah, it's so true. I find even with if you think about writing or podcasts or whatever, I feel like the times where you get the most reaction is when there's this authenticity in what you're doing, right?
Huh?
Because I say this all the time, there's so much noise. There's so much noise. There's so many, like if you scroll through TikTok and, listen to all the business people and you're like, yeah, but you're saying the same thing. But there are some people who stand out, like Gary Vee. He's like, don't go to college. You don't need a college degree. Like it's a waste of money. Do this, do that. Like you're just afraid of doing that. What happens if you fail? Who cares?
True.
Like there's a very authentic way he just is matter of fact about things. So when you talk about, email as a conversation, how do you get people to get to that authentic conversation? Because that authenticity has to translate to you when you then talk to the person.
Right.
Authenticity is a kind of personalized thing, right? Some people are more honest than others.
Hmm.
So how do you kind of coach people on that authenticity piece?
Well, I think part of it is, to your point, there's varying different people. You still have to be you no
Right.
matter what process you go through. And I think the authenticity, what you find is that when they go, "Oh, I can just teach." Like I tell teams to do this all the time. Do an exercise. And the exercise sounds like this. The very first day, you get the team together. I like to do it over lunch because what I find happens is that In 20 minutes, they're done. So you say, tell me all the reasons we're great. Be really greedy and you don't have to be polished, but this is why we're great. Then go to lunch, come back. And they go, oh my gosh, we got so many more things, right? And then a day later or 2 days later, you say, okay, now let's put these things in buckets. Let's figure out what's like kind, right? Can we create questions around this? Can we create insights around this? I'll give you an example. I had a client where they were in the security industry and they were losing a lot of clients. And I asked my contact there, I said, okay, I just need to know, are you apple to apple, widget to widget? Like, I didn't know. And what he told me was like 13 different reasons why they were better and different. I'm like, that's fantastic, but you just cannot say it that way. And so what we did is we created a checklist, and the checklist, and what they did is they call into their prospects and they say, listen, we recognize you've got a lot of choices when it comes to security. A lot of companies are struggling with making insurance claims because they're getting caught off guard by not having the right coverage. We've created a checklist. Some of these things will be really obvious. Some of these things will be middle of the road, and some of them are going to catch you by surprise. When do you have
Right.
20 minutes that I can share this with you? Right? It's just, it
Yeah.
was a different way it was better than them saying, we have night motion cameras, right? Because that would have been a great thing to say, but it wasn't anything
Right.
anyone was going to hear.
Right. So so you have your AI tool, but how have you
hmm
found, or I mean, AI is still new, so maybe the impact of it is still being understood. How do you see AI starting to change sales and starting to change
Yeah.
the sales conversation and outreach?
Well, I think there's good and bad. And I think everybody jumped on the AI wagon and it went, and I think it's going to go whoop. And I think this is what's going to be left because everybody thinks AI is sort of this tool that's going to save everything. And I think like, people will say to me, well, why don't we just use AI to write emails? And I'm like, go ahead, go right ahead. Tell me what you get, right? Because it doesn't know how. So smart people who are using AI, like I have an IP in the back of mine. That's why it asks 8 questions. It's why it asks you the subject line. It's why then it gives you an email because they have fed it. And there's a structure. So it knows that it's going to be teaching. There's like a formula in there that I've created that then goes into this email. So AI, here's my fear. I know you do too. I get pitched all the time. We can go through your LinkedIn and we can get all these leads for you. And I'm like, you are going to burn people so hard and so fast that, there's not going to be anybody left. And so you have to be smart about it. I'll tell you one of my pet peeves right now is when someone either doesn't set up their voicemail or their voicemail, or leaves it full. It's intentional.
Oh, I
And I
know.
think like, okay, help me understand. You want your salespeople to call their decision makers, but you don't want to take any phone calls from salespeople. So you just leave your
Right.
stuff full.
Right.
That drives me
Yeah.
crazy.
I'm one of these people who is probably the exception to the rule, but has to have no emails in their inbox at the end of the
Me too.
day. Yeah.
Inbox
Like
zero.
when I look at people's inbox and it's like 4,000 messages unread, and they're like, well, those are just spam. And I'm like, I don't care. Just delete them then. Create a business rule and delete them. It gives me heart palpitations when I
Me
see
too.
that. And I'll just go through and, to your point, what you're going to read and what you're not going to read just from the
Absolutely.
subject or from who
Absolutely.
it's from. So we're there.
You want
Agreed
me to give
together.
you a real heart attack? My husband has
Yes.
70,000.
Oh my gosh. At night, you don't want to just go in and
I do. I want to do. I've like, I go, Brian, honey, let's just like archive them, and you could start
yeah.
zero, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because a boss I had, which it was so funny I didn't know, and he was the EVP, and he had come back from 2 weeks of vacation, and I said, "Oh, okay, we're walking through everything," and I said, "Oh, then that's in your email." He's like, "No, I deleted it." And I'm like, "What do you mean you deleted it?" He goes, "When I leave for vacation, the day I come back, I delete every email in my inbox. I don't read them." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, if it's important enough, you'll tell me like you're telling me now. And if it isn't, I don't need to see it. Why am I going to read through six messages of people going back and forth for a problem that's solved? It's a
Right.
waste of my time.
Agree.
It's like
I agree.
90% of these emails are not gonna benefit me in the least. I'm gonna talk to my team and I'm gonna find out what I missed. I was like, that's really smart. Never really thought
Right.
about that. Probably why you're the
I always,
EVP.
yeah, and I always tell teams too, like, if you're going to talk about something different, start a new email. Don't use the same thread and people have to figure out where things are at. Like,
Yes.
be clean. Be clean.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talked about AI, you talked about the logic behind your tool, and it brings up the idea of frameworks. And I was just talking to somebody the
Hmm.
other day, and we're talking about frameworks, which I love a good framework or a governance model, although most people hate governance model. They think it's a dirty word. But the whole idea around a framework is really important. And so talk to us a little bit about, and you don't have to give away the secret sauce, but a little bit about how you think about the framework of what you built into your AI tool and why that framework is important for the output. Because,
Yeah.
a lot of people would say to you well, I'll just go into Gemini, or I'll just go into ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, pick your
Yeah.
poison.
Yeah.
But your services exist for a very specific reason,
Hmm.
because there's a method behind it. There's
Right.
not a method behind. Sam Altman isn't thinking about how to optimize email conversion rates. He needs another 100 billion to figure out his next step. So it's not top of the list for the LLM. So talk a little bit about the framework and how the framework has, like, kind of how you got to the framework and how it's progressed over the
Hmm.
years, and do you think it was important to put it into an AI tool? Was that
I did.
necessary? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's really two sets of framework. There's the framework that is the piece where they're sort of answering these 8 questions. And it's even going to ask things like, do you want this insight to be data backed? Do you want it to be cost of inaction? So
Mm,
there's different choices that they get to make so that when it gets done through that framework of those questions, then it's just going to ask you which of the 5 subject lines do you want to choose. So it's going to give you 5 subject lines that, again, there's another framework in there that says, like, these are the right words, this is the right length, this is the way
mm,
it should look. And then there's a framework to the actual email. So after you do all the inputs, which takes about 5 minutes total, then it takes my IP and the framework for that email. So it's very short. It definitely is a relationship deposit, and I make it as simple as possible. We want to reduce the friction so that they go,
right,
oh, wait, I do want to know this. So
right,
there's multiple frameworks in there. And to your point, it has changed over time because there are, the environment changes. And that's where sales goes wrong, is that they're like, I did this for 30 years. I just, have you met Amazon, Uber, Verbo?
right,
Like, world changed, right? And so we have to
right.
sell differently.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. We didn't go into it deeply when you brought up the topic of enablement and training.
Uh-huh.
How much do you think you benefit or get hurt by poor enablement, poor training, or lack of training overall, in terms of people believing you're the email whisperer?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that when it comes to sales teams, when they get onboarded, there's a lot of like role playing with cold call and stuff, but nobody looks at email. And it seems like the emails, everything that I always see from some of the biggest companies in the world to individual business owners, it's always about pitching. It's about convincing, and
Mm,
the subject line is
yeah,
horrible, right? And so I don't get hurt in terms of them. I think it's a learning period where they go, whoa, we've
yeah,
never really thought about the emails and how many they send and how much time it consumes and how bad they really
right.
are. And when you talk to the managers, they go, oh yeah, those emails are the worst things I've ever seen.
Yeah. It's interesting because people are really kind of good at self-diagnosing the process and our problem and saying, "Oh yeah, yeah, we suck at that." And then kind of
Right.
like,
That's true. That's
"Okay,
really true.
we're you gonna do anything about that?" Or what, how do you think that's gonna change? Do you think that, or let me ask you the question differently. How do you think outreach is going to change with AI, in terms of, do you think email will always be a thing? Do you envision a world where email goes away and it becomes some other touch point that is, I mean, I don't know what it would be. I'm not that smart
Right.
to think
Right.
10 years in the future, but any
I mean,
thoughts around that?
I feel like it's a crystal ball, right? Like we don't
Yeah.
know. And I try not to get too far ahead of where we're at because I think trying to predict the future, it's like trying to pick the lottery numbers, right? I can't do that either. I've certainly tried lately because a number, you
Right.
can't play lottery until it's big
Right.
enough, right? Crazy.
Right. Right.
But I think in the right now, I think that email absolutely has a place. It is not for selling. You still need a conversation. I'm not dismissing and I'm not a social seller. I just want them to get the meeting so they can have the opportunity to have the conversation, right? This is about getting a meeting, and that's all it's really about.
So that's interesting. So when you think about the email or the customer journey and you think about the selling process, I need 3x my pipeline. We talked about that. And there's also, and I'm looking back in my history of training is, there's has to be X number of touches with a client before they'll buy, whatever that is. So you work with them to get that initial meeting. What is your take on email follow-up post that meeting, and does your tool do that? Like how do you coach people through, great, you had that conversation, people felt good, you kind of nailed it, but now a week's gone by, week and a
Hmm.
half's gone by, 2 weeks gone by, you
Yep.
haven't heard from them, so you want to do a little email nudge. But isn't
Right.
that an opportunity to kind of flub or lose that relationship deposit you made if you kind of revert back to your old ways on the next email?
Yeah. So if you revert back 100%, so I say throughout the entire sales process from start to finish, you need to be making relationship deposits. You need to show that you care. So maybe there was an industry article that came out, and you can say to them, hey, I was just thinking about our conversation, and I think this is something that you want to be sure you look at. I know you're super busy. So if you will just read the 3 bullet points that I indented and colored purple, you're going to know exactly what this article is about. Oh, by the way, if you're
Mm,
really interested, I've attached the whole thing here. And you're just continuing to make them better. So I always say that, your first meeting is kind of free. So if you get the meeting, but then
yeah.
you pitched, you might not get your second meeting.
Yeah.
So you need to think about, what is it that I'm either going to recap in an email? And again, it's not the pitching part. So the way the first call should go is after that meeting, I asked for 20 minutes. I'm going to tell you the questions that you really should be thinking about, if that's the thing that got the meeting in the first place. And then if they go, God, this is so interesting, we've just not thought about this, and they want to ask more questions, I can say authentically, like, listen, I promised you 20 minutes and I don't want to take one more minute of that time. How about we schedule another time later this week and we
Yeah.
can dive into this a little bit deeper? Help me understand, sort of what you guys are thinking in terms of X, Y, and Z, and I can
Right.
share with you. And sometimes I will say, if I don't feel like they're with me, I might say I can share with you how other organizations who have very similar set of circumstances have sort of dealt with this. I didn't say
Right.
me.
Right. Right. This is super interesting. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
I
It was
loved
fun.
this conversation. It's interesting because I think that when technology changes, people make these big professional, oh, email's dead. Oh, email more. It's
Uh
now
huh.
AI, it's now this. What I agree with you is that we've had this shift and it's going to come down. And what we keep on seeing, and what I love about what you're talking about here is the framework behind it, the
Hmm.
intelligence behind the decisions that AI is going to make for you is you. It's the people, it's your business, but it's asking it in a new and different way. And so I love that take. And I honestly have to now re-examine everything I do in email. And I'm going to be now super critical of myself. But no, it's a really interesting take on, I think, a subject that when I first came across your LinkedIn thinking like, oh, that's still a thing. And as we've talked and as I've listened to, the posts on LinkedIn, I was like, God, everybody should be, why isn't everybody listening to this lady? Like, go talk to Beth. This is still like so relevant and important to selling. And I think that people need to spend in the onboarding process probably a whole day on this. And I think the thing that they have to spend more time on is that framework and that process. And what are those hooks and questions that I really need to educate people about? Because I don't think people spend enough time doing that.
They don't. And I think too, with onboarding, if they just built the bridge between their offering and the
Right.
outcome, there's that conversation would be so different. We just stop at the offering, right?
Right.
And this is
Right.
why we're so great.
Right. Well, we're going to continue to follow what you're doing
Awesome.
and make sure that we understand how to get better at email marketing and move forward. And hopefully, we will listen to what you have to say, and people will understand this and reach out. If people want to reach out, how can they find you?
Yeah, the easiest way is just LinkedIn. Just find Beth Mastery. I'm the only one out there, and that's
We'll
Mastre.
put the link
So
in
simple.
the meeting notes so
Okay.
people can link to you. Great. Thank you
All
for
right.
your time today. I
Awesome.
really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rich. All right.